The grand atrium of the Valentine Conservatory always felt a little bit like a museum after hours. Cool, quiet, and full of expensive, silent things. The star of the room was the piano. It wasn't just any piano. It was a massive, gleaming Bissendorfer concert grand, its polished black surface reflecting the soft evening lights like a still pool of water. Everyone said it had a soul, a temperament. It was the crown jewel. Evelyn Valentine knew she was supposed to feel something special when she touched it. As the daughter of the family that owned the whole conservatory, it was basically her inheritance. But tonight, just like most nights, all she felt was a low, tired pressure behind her eyes. Her fingers had just finished running through a complicated passage from a Rachmaninoff piece. The notes were perfect. Her teacher said so. Her mother definitely would have said so. But it sounded empty, even to her own ears. It was just sound. You're thinking about it too much, a voice said from beside her. Arthur, the conservatory's current star student, leaned against the piano with a confident smile. He was brilliant, everyone said. He had the kind of technical skill that won competitions. Music isn't about feeling, Evelyn. It's about control, precision. You let the audience think they feel something. Evelyn sighed, pulling her hands back into her lap. So it's all just a trick? A performance? The best kind? Arthur said with a shrug. It's why we'll win that duet competition. Precision, not passion. Passion is messy. The word passion felt like a joke. Evelyn looked around the empty, sparkling room. It was all so controlled, so perfect. The spotless marble floors, the silent portraits of great composers lining the walls, the perfect, untouchable piano. Where was the mess in any of this? That's when she noticed him. The new janitor. He was on the second-floor balcony that circled the atrium, slowly polishing the brass railing. He was an older man, maybe in his 50s, with a quiet, focused way of moving. He was thin, and his hands, even from this distance, looked careful as they worked the cloth over the metal. He was a part of the scenery, just another piece of the quiet building. A strange, reckless frustration bubbled up in Evelyn. Here was Arthur talking about tricks, and there was a man literally cleaning up the stage for their perfect, passionless performances. The whole thing felt silly. See? Evelyn said to Arthur, her voice louder than necessary, letting it bounce off the marble. Even he gets it. He appreciates the view. Probably thinks it's all very beautiful and romantic. She was being unkind, and she knew it, but she couldn't stop. The pressure had to go somewhere. The janitor paused. He didn't look down, but his polishing stopped. For a second, Evelyn felt a flicker of shame. Then Arthur laughed, a sharp, agreeing sound. I'm sure he does. A front-row seat to real talent for free. The janitor finally glanced down. Not at Arthur, but at the piano. His eyes weren't angry or embarrassed. They were just thoughtful, deep-set, and calm. He gave a single, slow nod, as if agreeing with some private thought, and then went back to his work. That nod, so simple and sure, irked Evelyn more than Arthur's laugh. It was as if this quiet man had seen right through her performance, through her family's name, through the shiny piano, and found the hollow center. The words were out of her mouth before she could think. Sharp and sarcastic, carving through the quiet of the atrium. You know what? She declared, standing up and pointing a finger towards the balcony. I'll make you a deal. If you can actually play this thing, if you can get a real tune out of this temperamental beast, I'll marry you. How's that for romance? Arthur burst into full laughter, slapping his knee. There's your passion, Evelyn. A marriage proposal. The janitor, Leo his name tag, said. Leo looked at her again. This time, his gaze held hers for a long 3 seconds. His expression was unreadable. Not smiling, not offended, just present. Then, without a word, he dipped his cloth into his bucket, wrung it out, and continued polishing the railing, moving steadily along the balcony as if he had heard. Nothing more interesting than the time of day. The echo of her own stupid challenge hung in the air. The joke was over. The moment, cruel and silly, passed. Evelyn felt a hot flush creep up her neck. She had turned the man's quiet work into a punchline for her own bad mood. "Come on," Arthur said, still chuckling. "Let's go. You need to lighten up." Evelyn gathered her sheet music, the pages crisp and important in her hands. As she walked out, she stole one last look at the Biesendorfer, sitting so regally under the lights, and then up at the balcony. Leo was gone, vanished into the shadows of the upper hallway. The atrium was silent once more, just a museum holding its breath. She had thrown her challenge like a stone into a pond, and the surface had simply smoothed over again, showing no ripple. She convinced herself he probably didn't even know how to turn on a radio. The strange little scene was forgotten, buried under thoughts of the next day's practice schedule and her mother's inevitable questions about the duet with Arthur. The day after her challenge felt strange to Evelyn. A little bit of shame had settled in her stomach, a cold small stone she tried to ignore. She avoided the main atrium, using a side entrance to get to her practice room. She told herself it was because she needed to focus, not because she was embarrassed to see the quiet janitor again. But over the next few days, small, impossible things began to happen. It started with the piano itself. The Biesendorfer was a famously sensitive instrument. Changes in humidity, temperature, even the mood of the player could affect it. The head technician was always tweaking it, and it was usually just a tiny bit off when Evelyn played first thing in the morning. Yet now, for 3 days in a row, it was an absolutely perfect tune. Not just acceptable, but breathtakingly precise. The notes rang clear and true, from the lowest growl to the highest chime. When she asked the technician about it, he just shrugged, looking pleased with himself. "It's settling in nicely," was all he said. Then it was the music. Evelyn was struggling with a particular section of a Chopin ballade. The fingering was awkward, and it always sounded clumsy. One morning she came in to find the sheet music already on the stand. That was odd, sure she had put it away. And there, in the margin next to the troublesome passage, was a single light pencil mark. It wasn't a correction, not really. It was just a small curved arrow suggesting she shift her hand a half-beat earlier. A simple, almost invisible suggestion. She tried it. The difficult passage unfolded smoothly, like a knot coming undone. It didn't just work. It felt right. It made the music breathe. She stared at the pencil mark. It was done with a confident, gentle hand. It wasn't the technician's writing. Puzzled, she asked the practice room scheduler if anyone else had been assigned the room. No one had? A prank from Arthur? He would have taken credit immediately. Her mother? She would have hired a famous tutor, not left a secret pencil mark. The only other person who moved through these rooms after everyone else went home was the janitor, Leo. The thought was ridiculous. But the perfectly tuned piano and the mysterious, brilliant suggestion were facts. They sat in her mind, not fitting anywhere. Curiosity, sharp and stubborn, began to push the shame away. She had to know. That night, she told her mother she was pulling an all-nighter to practice for the duet competition. Instead, she hid. She chose a dark corner on the second-floor balcony, the same balcony where Leo had been polishing. It was behind a large, potted fern that gave her a narrow view of the piano below. The conservatory at night was a different creature. The daytime sounds of students laughing, scales running, and doors slamming were gone. Now it was all hollow silence, the groan of old pipes and the faint hum of the security lights. It felt both eerie and peaceful, She waited for what felt like hours. Her legs cramped. She almost gave up, convincing herself the whole idea was stupid. She was an heiress hiding in a plant, spying on a janitor. It was the plot of a bad movie. Just as she decided to leave, a soft click echoed in the quiet. The service entrance door at the back of the atrium swung open. A slice of dim hallway light fell in, and a figure stepped through. It was Leo. He moved silently in his soft-soled shoes. He didn't turn on the main atrium lights. He walked with purpose, not like someone cleaning, but like someone going to a specific, important spot. He went straight to the Bissendorfer. Evelyn held her breath. Would he dust it? Polish its surface with his cloth? He didn't. He pulled out the piano bench, the legs whispering on the marble. He sat down, and as he did, his whole body seemed to change. The slight slump in his shoulders from a long day's work straightened. He became still centered. He wasn't Leo the janitor anymore. He was a man about to speak a language he knew perfectly. He lifted the fallboard, revealing the row of ivory and ebony keys. For a long moment, he just looked at them, his hands resting in his lap. The silence in the vast room was thick and heavy. Then his hands came up, and they settled over the keys with a natural grace that made Evelyn's own trained fingers look clumsy. He took a deep, quiet breath, and he began to play Dot. It wasn't Chopin. It wasn't Rachmaninoff. It wasn't anything Evelyn had ever heard before. And it was the most beautiful, the most heartbreaking thing she had ever experienced. The music started low, a slow, deep melody that rose from the bass notes like a memory trying to surface. It was sad, but not weak. It had a strength to it, a story of loss that hadn't destroyed the storyteller. Then his right hand joined, weaving notes around the melody like sunlight through storm clouds. The music swelled, filled with a passion that was anything but messy. It was controlled, but that control was a vessel for a huge, powerful feeling. It spoke of lonely streets, of old dreams packed away in boxes, of a love for something so deep it had become a quiet, constant ache. He played with his eyes closed, completely lost in the world he was creating. His fingers flew over runs that were more complex than anything Arthur could play, but they weren't showy. They served the feeling. They were the feeling. This wasn't performance. This was a confession. Evelyn, hidden in the dark, felt the cold stone of shame in her gut melt away, replaced by an overwhelming wave of heat that rushed to her face and pricked at her eyes. Her own perfect, empty notes echoed in her head, sounding like childish banging in comparison. She had laughed at him. She had offered her hand in marriage as a joke to a man who could do this. She felt small, foolish, and completely shattered. The piece came to an end, not with a crashing finale, but with a series of soft, resolving chords that faded into the silence, leaving it richer than before. Leo sat for a minute, his head bowed, his hands back in his lap. Then he gently closed the fallboard, stood up, and pushed the bench back in with the same quiet care. He turned and walked back towards the service door, his shoulders settling back into their familiar, weary posture. He was Leo the janitor again. The ghost in the grand piano had vanished. Evelyn didn't move for a long time. The silence now felt different. It was full of the echo of that music. The museum had come to life, and she had been the only visitor, a witness to a secret masterpiece. She finally crept out, her legs stiff, her mind reeling. The joke was over, all right, but it was on her. She had found the passion she thought was dead. It was living in the quiet, careful hands of the man she had tried to make a punchline. For 2 full days, Evelyn did nothing. She moved through her routine like a ghost herself. She played her scales, met with her duet partner, ate meals with her mother, but inside, everything was different. The music she played sounded tinny and false. The grand conservatory felt like a beautiful shell. Her mind kept replaying that night the shadowed figure on the bench, the transformation in his posture, and most of all, the river of sound that had poured from the piano. It had been real. It hadn't been a dream. The Shane was still there, but it had changed. It wasn't just about being rude anymore. It was about being blind. She had looked at a man and seen only his job, his quietness, and had decided there was nothing else to see. She had been so terribly wrong. On the third morning, she knew she couldn't pretend anymore. She had to face it. She waited near the service closets on the second floor, knowing his cleaning route. When she saw him come out with his cart of supplies, her heart hammered against her ribs. He looked up, saw her, and gave a simple, polite nod, just like before. He started to move past her. "Wait," Evelyn said. The word came out quieter than she meant. He stopped, turning his calm, patient eyes toward her. I need to talk to you," she said. She led the way to a small, sunlit practice room that was empty. He followed, standing near the door, holding his cleaning cloth. He didn't look nervous, just waiting. Evelyn took a deep breath. "I heard you. The other night. I was up on the balcony." A flicker of something surprise, maybe concern passed over his face, but he said nothing. "I hid. I'm sorry for that too," she said, the words tumbling out. "But I heard you play, and it was the most incredible thing I've ever heard." She looked directly at him. "I am so sorry for what I said before. That challenge? It was cruel and stupid. I take it back, completely. Please forget I ever said it." For the first time, she saw a real reaction. The lines around his eyes softened, just a little. He looked down at the cloth in his hands, then back at her. "It's forgotten," he said, his voice low and rough, like an instrument that wasn't used often. "You don't have to worry." But Evelyn shook her head. "That's not all. This was the harder part. Who are you? I mean, how can you play like that? Why are you here?" She gestured vaguely at the cleaning cart in the hallway. A shadow passed behind his eyes. He was quiet for so long, she thought he wouldn't answer. "I play to remember," he said finally. It wasn't an explanation, but it was a truth. "Remember what?" He just shook his head, a small, final movement. The door on that question was closed. Evelyn felt a surge of frustration, but she pushed it down. This wasn't about pushing him. It was about fixing something in herself. "Will you teach me?" she asked. Now he looked truly surprised. "Teach you? Not the notes. I have teachers for that." She struggled to explain. "You play with feeling. I don't know how to do that. My playing is empty. It's just notes. I heard the difference. Will you teach me how to make it mean something?" He studied her face, as if looking to see if she was joking or playing another game. She tried to show him she wasn't. She felt young and foolish under his gaze. "I don't think I can teach that," he said slowly. "Please," Evelyn said. "Just try, please." Another long silence hung between them. He finally gave a single, slow nod. "Not here," he said. "Not on the main floor. And not as a teacher. Just talk about the music." And so their strange lessons began. They met in a small, out-of-the-way storage room that had an old, slightly out-of-tune upright piano pushed against a wall. It was a world away from the perfect Biesendorfer. The first session was awkward. Evelyn played a piece she knew perfectly. She finished and looked at him expectantly. He was quiet. "What is that piece about?" he asked. Evelyn blinked. "It's Chopin's Prelude in E minor. But what is it about?" He pressed gently. She stared at him. No one had ever asked her that. "It's sad. It's in a minor key." "Close your eyes," he said. Play the first 3 notes. Don't think about your fingers. Think about a room you loved as a child, but you can't go back to. The door is locked forever. Play the notes for that locked door. It felt silly, but she closed her eyes and tried. The 3 notes came out, and for the first time, they weren't just the correct pitches. They held a weight, a tiny, fragile feeling. He nodded. Good. Now the next phrase. That's the memory of sunlight through the window of that room. Piece by piece, note by note, he didn't talk about technique. He talked about pictures, about weather, about the feeling of cold metal or warm wood. He taught her about silence, how the space between notes was just as important as the notes themselves. Because that's where the listener's heart had room to feel Dot in turn, she started to ask him small questions. Not about his past, but about music. What did he think of this composer? Did he like this recording? Slowly, he began to share little bits. He would hum a folk tune from a country she'd never visited. He would mention that a certain chord always sounded like the color deep blue to him. She learned his name was Leo. Just Leo. She saw him begin to relax in these sessions. Once, after she played a phrase with a real trembling emotion, he smiled. It was a small, rare thing, like the sun breaking through clouds for just a second. It made him look younger, but outside that little room, the real world hadn't gone away. Arthur noticed she was distracted. "You're playing differently," he said after a duet practice, his tone accusing. "It's looser, sloppier." Her mother noticed too. "Darling, is something wrong? You seem distant. Are you and Arthur having problems? The duet competition is next month. Focus is everything." Then, one afternoon, her mother found them. Evelyn was in the small storage room, and Leo was demonstrating how a simple melody could sound like a question or an answer, depending on the touch. The door opened, and Victoria Valentine stood there, her perfume filling the dusty air. Her eyes went from her daughter to the janitor to the open piano. Her face was a mask of cool confusion. "Evelyn, what is this?" "Leo, shouldn't you be working?" Leo immediately stood up, his shoulders tightening. "Yes, ma'am." "My apologies." He gathered his things quickly and left without a backward glance. "Mother." "It's not what you think," Evelyn started. "I think you are wasting your valuable time," Victoria said, her voice sharp. "That man is an employee. He cleans floors. This is inappropriate and a distraction. I will not have the conservatory's air being gossiped about. This stops now." Later that day, Evelyn heard from the office manager. Leo had been reassigned. He would no longer be cleaning the main academic buildings. He would be working in the boiler rooms and the distant athletic complex. Their lessons, their fragile connection, had been found and cut off. Just like that Dot, the days after Leo was sent away, felt like someone had turned the volume down on the whole world for Evelyn. The conservatory was just a building again. She went back to her perfect, empty practicing. Arthur was pleased. Her mother was satisfied. But the music was dead to her. She couldn't unhear what real feeling sounded like. The frustration built inside her, hot and tight. She wasn't just angry at her mother. She was angry at the mystery. Who was he? The question buzzed in her head. She had seen a masterpiece, but someone had torn away the artist's name. She needed to know it. She started in the conservatory's own archives, a dusty room full of old programs and yearbooks. She looked for staff records, but there was nothing beyond a basic employment file for Leo. No last name, no history. It was as if he appeared out of thin air to push him up. The lack of information made her more determined. If the conservatory didn't have answers, maybe the wider world did. On a free afternoon, she told her mother she was going to the city library to study musical scores. Instead, she sat in the quiet microfilm room, the machine whirring softly. She didn't know what she was looking for. She thought about his hands, his age, the deep sadness in his music. She started searching old newspaper archives for stories about pianists, for scandals or disappearances from 20, maybe 25 years ago. She scanned blurry black and white pages, her eyes aching from the flickering screen. And then she saw it. It wasn't a big headline, but it was on the front page of the art section from 22 years ago. The photograph was grainy, but the intensity in the young man's eyes was unmistakable. It was him. A younger him, his face fuller, his hair darker, but him. The headline read, "A Vanishing Virtuoso. Lev Orlov Disappears on Eve of Destiny." Her heart thudded. She leaned closer, reading quickly. Asterisk Lev Orlov, 24, hailed as the most explosive piano talent to emerge in a generation, has vanished. Scheduled to make his Carnegie Hall debut tomorrow night with a performance of his own original symphony, Orlov failed to appear for his final rehearsal today. His hotel room was found empty, personal belongings left behind. The discovery comes amid swirling controversy. As famed conductor and composer, Maestro V has publicly accused Orlov of plagiarizing the very symphony he was to perform, claiming the work was stolen from his own private manuscripts. Orlov's manager states the accusations are baseless and cruel, but with the composer missing, a cloud now hangs over what was to be a triumphant night. The search continues. Asterisk Evelyn scrolled further, finding follow-up articles. The story got uglier. Maestro V was a powerful, well-connected man. Without left to defend himself, the narrative took hold. The brilliant young star, crushed by the pressure, had stolen a masterpiece to cover his own inadequacy and then run away. No other original work by Lev Orlov was ever found. The symphony, called Elegy for a Lost City, was never performed. Within a year, his name was a footnote, a cautionary tale about stolen glory. She printed the articles, her hands trembling. Lev Orlov, not just a janitor, a genius who had been erased. She didn't know what to do. She couldn't just go to her mother or Arthur. This was a secret bigger than her lessons. She needed to see him. She found out where the athletic complex was, a series of modern buildings on the far edge of the conservatory's vast grounds. It was a place for students to blow off steam. Far from the serious halls of music. She found him in a cavernous room under the basketball courts, cleaning mats. The air smelled of sweat and old rubber. He was alone. He looked up, and for a second, she saw the young man from the newspaper photo in his eyes, before the weary mask settled back into place. "Evelyn, you shouldn't be here," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the big space. "I know who you are," she said, not moving closer. She held out the folded printouts. He froze. He didn't take them. He just looked at the papers in her hand, as if they were a ghost he'd been waiting for a long time. "Lev Orlov," she said softly. He closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them, he looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with cleaning. "That person is gone." "He's not," Evelyn insisted. "I heard him. In the atrium. That music you played. Was it from the symphony? The elegy?" He walked slowly to a stack of mats and sat down, the fight gone out of him. He gestured for her to sit on another. "A piece of it," he admitted, his voice low. "Just a fragment. I remember that part. Did you steal it?" She asked, the question blunt. She had to know. His head snapped up, and for the first time, she saw a flash of the fire that must have once been in him. "No," he said, the word solid and firm as stone. "It was mine. Every note. It came from the streets I walked as a boy, from the sound of my grandmother's voice, from the feeling of being lost in a new country. It was my story. Then what happened? Why did you leave? He looked at his hands, the careful, strong hands of a pianist that now scrubbed floors. Maestro V heard an early draft. He wanted it. He offered to co-compose it, to put his famous name on it and make us both rich. I refused. It was my soul on those pages. He was powerful. I was a nobody from nowhere. When I wouldn't give it to him, he said he would take it anyway. He told everyone I was the thief. The newspapers, the music world. They believed him. Who would they believe? A legend or a young immigrant with a temper? He took a shaky breath. On the day before the debut, I went for a walk to clear my head. I saw my face on a newspaper stand with the word thief next to it. I just kept walking. I went back to my room. I took the manuscript, the only copy, and I burned it in the sink. If I couldn't have it, neither could he. Then I walked out the door and kept going. I let them steal my name, my future, because I thought it was better than letting him steal my voice. I was wrong. I was just young and heartbroken. The silence in the room was heavy with his story. Evelyn understood now. The deep sadness in his music wasn't just mood. It was history. It was a ghost of a symphony. So you never played again? For anyone? He shook his head. Not for 22 years. Not until that night. This job. Being around the instruments. The quiet. It called to me. I thought no one would hear. Evelyn looked at this man who had carried a stolen reputation and a burned masterpiece inside him for more than half his life. Her own struggles with music, with her mother's expectations, felt small and pale in comparison. Your music isn't lost, she said, a sudden fierce idea forming. You remembered that part. You played it. What if? What if you remembered more? He gave a sad, hopeless smile. It's gone, Evelyn. Ashes in a New York City hotel sink. But you're not ashes, she said, standing up. You're here. And you remember. That has to count for something. She didn't know what she could do, but she knew she couldn't just walk away. Not again. This wasn't about a silly challenge anymore. It was about giving a ghost his name back. The night of the Valentine Conservatory Gala was the biggest event of the year. The atrium was transformed. Crystal chandeliers blazed, women in sparkling dresses and men in crisp tuxedos sipped champagne, their laughter bouncing off the marble. The air smelled of expensive perfume and anticipation. At the center of it all, under a single spotlight, sat the majestic Bissendorfer. Evelyn stood backstage, dressed in a gown of deep blue, feeling like she was wearing a costume. Her mother fussed with her hair. Perfect. You look perfect. Arthur is waiting. Remember, after the duet, your father will announce your partnership for the new international tour. And then, her mother gave a significant smile. Arthur has something to ask you. In front of everyone. It will be magical. Arthur stood nearby, straightening his body in a mirror, a look of cool satisfaction on his face. He caught Evelyn's eye in the reflection and winked. It felt like a transaction being finalized. Evelyn's stomach was a tight knot. All evening, her eyes had searched the crowded room for one person. She had asked him to come, begged him, but he had just shaken his head quietly. That world isn't for me anymore, he had said. She hadn't seen him anywhere. The head of the conservatory, her father, stepped to the microphone on the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Tonight, we celebrate a legacy of musical excellence. And to showcase that bright future, please welcome our two shining stars, my daughter, and the brilliant young pianist she has chosen as her partner. This was it. The path laid out for her. The perfect, passionless future. Evelyn walked onto the stage, the applause washing over her. She sat at the piano bench. Arthur sat beside her at the second grand piano they had brought in. He gave her a confident nod. They were about to begin the technically dazzling, emotionally cold duet they had practiced 1,000 times. But as Evelyn placed her hands on the keys, they felt dead. She looked out at the audience, the proud, expectant faces, the flash of cameras. She saw her mother beaming. She saw a future of more galas, more perfect, empty performances. And then, at the very back of the hall, near the service entrance, she saw a still figure in plain, dark clothes. Leo. He had come. He stood in the shadows, apart from the glittering crowd, watching. That was all she needed. She leaned toward the microphone. Her voice, when it came out, was clear but not loud. It cut through the expectant quiet. Thank you. But before we play what is expected, I'd like to say something about music. A soft murmur rippled through the crowd. Her father frowned. Arthur stared at her. Real music isn't always found where you look for it, Evelyn said, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Sometimes the most powerful voice has been silent for a long time. Tonight, we have a chance to hear a voice that was lost. She saw her mother's smile freeze, then shatter into confusion. I'd like to perform a different piece. A piece that has never been heard before in this hall. A piece called Elegy for a Lost City. She took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on the back of the room. And I cannot play it alone. Maestro Lev Orlov. Will you join me? A gasp went up from the older members of the audience. The name, forgotten by many, but known to some, was a shock. People twisted in their seats, looking around. Who was she talking to? All eyes turned to follow her gaze. They saw only a simple, older man by the door. The crowd was confused. A few people even chuckled, thinking it was a strange joke. But then, Leo Lev stepped forward. He didn't walk like a janitor. He walked with a slow, steady dignity down the long center aisle. The whispers died. The air grew thick with silence. He didn't look at the shocked faces. He looked only at the piano, and then, for a brief moment, at Evelyn. In his eyes, she saw a storm of fear and memory, and a flicker of the young man who had burned his own dreams. He reached the stage. Arthur, bewildered and angry, stood up from his bench. Lev ignored him. He sat at the second piano. He closed his eyes for a few seconds, gathering himself. The entire hall held its breath. Then he began. A single, low, questioning note from the bass. It was the same fragment Evelyn had heard that first night, but now it was an opening. It was a key turning in a long locked door. Evelyn listened for 2 bars, feeling the rhythm of his grief, his memory. Then she joined in. She didn't play the melody. She wove around it, supporting it, answering his musical questions with chords that shimmered like old, regretful tears. She used everything he had taught her, about space, about color, about feeling. It wasn't a duel of 2 pianos. It was a conversation. His playing was the story, the loss, the anger, the streets of a forgotten homeland. Her playing was the listening, the understanding, the gentle hand trying to heal an old wound. Together, they rebuilt his symphony from the ashes of his memory, note by aching. Beautiful note. The music filled the atrium. It wasn't pretty or polite. It was raw and real. People cried. Evelyn's mother sat with a hand over her mouth, her eyes wide, seeing her daughter truly play for the first time. Arthur's face was pale with stunned understanding. As the final movement built. Lev's hands flew across the keys with a fury and a freedom that spoke of 22 years of silence finally breaking. It ended not with a bang, but with a slow, soft chord from Evelyn, a resolution that felt like forgiveness, and a single, high Pure note from Lef that hung in the air like a star, finally visible after a long night. Silence. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then, one person stood and began to clap. Then another. Then the entire hall erupted. The applause was thunderous, emotional. A standing ovation that shook the crystal in the chandeliers. Leaf sat at the piano, breathing heavily, looking at his hands as if he didn't recognize them. Evelyn stood and walked to him. She didn't take a solo bow. She simply stood beside his piano and offered him her hand. He looked up at her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. He took her hand, not as a proposal, but as a lifeline pulled to shore. He stood, and together they bowed. The challenge, made as a joke in this very room, had been answered in a way no one could have imagined. He had played, and in doing so, he hadn't won a bride. He had won back his name, and Evelyn hadn't found a husband. She had found her voice. As they stood facing the cheering crowd, the space between them was no longer that of an heiress and a janitor, or a student and a teacher. It was the respectful, grateful space between two musicians who had finally, truly made music. The future was unwritten, and it was finally their own.